In the winter of 1812, 15 children disappeared from a quiet frontier town in southern Illinois. No one saw it coming. The townspeople thought it was wolves, or maybe Indians. But the truth was much worse. It wasn't the forest that stole their children. It was the school, and the ones who ran it. The Kensington family. This is a story hidden for over 200 years. Buried by the government. Erased from newspapers. Forgotten. Until now. What you're about to hear is based on sealed court records, the whispered words of a dying child, and the final journal entries of those who lived, and died, in Prairie View. If you're ready, let's begin. Part 1. The House on the Hill. In 1812, the Illinois Territory was still wild and dangerous. Prairie View was a small, hopeful town with only about 200 people. It stood near the banks of the Sangamon River, where families from Kentucky and Tennessee had settled, hoping for better land and a better life. They built cabins from trees they cut themselves. They hunted, farmed, and prayed. Life was hard. Winters were long and cold. Roads turned to thick mud in spring. Bears still roamed the woods. People had to rely on each other just to survive. They had no doctor, no sheriff. Just one general store, run by old Jeremiah Caldwell. His store was also the post office, town hall, and gossip center. Next to it stood a small wooden chapel, where a traveling preacher named Samuel Hayes came once a month to give sermons, if the weather allowed it. Education was a dream for most families. Children helped on the farm as soon as they could walk. School was a luxury, something only the rich had. The closest real school was 60 miles away in Kaskaskia. Most kids couldn't even read their own names. That's why, in the spring of 1809, the town rejoiced when the Kensington family arrived. They came in a large wagon filled with books, furniture, and something else the town couldn't see, darkness. Cornelius Kensington was a tall man with ghost-white hair and cold gray eyes. He claimed he had studied at a seminary in Pennsylvania. He spoke perfect Latin and quoted scripture like a preacher. He said God had sent him a vision, children crying out in darkness, begging for light. His wife, Matilda, was just as impressive. Thin and serious, with sharp blue eyes that never seemed to blink. She said her father had been a schoolmaster in Philadelphia. She could read Shakespeare from memory, solve math problems in seconds, and sew a dress while quoting Bible verses. She had a stern way about her, but she was kind to children. Patient, gentle. They had twin sons, Jeremiah and Josiah, both 24 years old. Pale and quiet, the boys were almost two alike. They dressed the same, moved the same, and even spoke at the same time. Some thought it was just a twin thing. Others found it strange. They rarely smiled. They never laughed. The Kensingtons said they wanted to start a school, a real school. Not just reading and writing, but religion, languages, and moral training. Prairie View had never heard of anything like it. Cornelius said he would accept students from poor families, even if they couldn't pay. People were overjoyed. It felt like a miracle. They called it Prairie View Academy. The Kensingtons built it themselves, a huge 2-story log building on a hill above the town. It had 24 rooms, classrooms, dorms, a chapel, even living space for the family. It was the biggest building in the entire region. Parents from all across the area came to enroll their children. Within months, 32 students were living at the academy, ages 6 to 13. They studied during the day, prayed at night, and rarely came home. Some families sent extra food or supplies. Others wrote letters that never got answers. But people trusted the Kensingtons. After all, they were godly people. Or so they thought. Over the next 3 years, things started to change, little things at first. Some children looked thinner when they came home for visits. Others seemed quieter, afraid. Some parents noticed strange bruises. They asked questions, but Cornelius always had explanations. Accidents during chores, illnesses, growing pains. Still, rumors started to spread. One mother said her daughter refused to sleep at night, afraid of the whispering twins. Another claimed her son spoke in Latin in his sleep, though he had never studied Latin before. Then came the winter of 1812. 15 children vanished. Gone. At first, the town thought it was wild animals or Indian raids. The militia searched the woods. They found nothing. No tracks. No signs of struggle. No bodies. The Kensingtons said the missing children had been sent home. Family emergencies, Cornelius claimed. But none of the families had received their children. No one had seen them leave. Still, people hesitated. This was the Kensingtons, after all. Teachers. Christians. Could they really be lying? It wasn't until one small girl stumbled into her mother's cabin in the middle of a snowstorm that everything changed. She was barefoot, bleeding, and freezing. Her clothes were torn. Her voice was barely a whisper. But before she died in her mother's arms, she said 5 words that would shatter Prairie View forever. "They're killing us at school. .. To be continued in Part 2. The Prairie View Incident, Part 2, The Disappearance of Samuel Hartwell. The construction of Prairie View Academy had taken nearly 8 months. Every man in the settlement had helped build it, swinging hammers, sawing timbers, and hauling stone. In return, they were promised reduced tuition for their children, a deal that felt like a blessing. What better investment than education? But the building they helped raise was no ordinary schoolhouse. Cornelius Kensington said the design came from new ideas in education, concepts he'd studied back east. The building included small, windowless rooms for one-on-one learning. A basement chapel, storage rooms so large, some wondered what they were really for. Still, no one asked too many questions. The Kensingtons accepted both day students and boarders, charging modest fees. When money was tight, families could pay in livestock, crops, or labor. For the first time, even the poorest farmers could send their children to a real school. The curriculum was impressive: reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, Latin, even natural philosophy and theology. Most schools in the East couldn't match it. Word spread fast. Through traders, churches, and family letters, the story of Prairie View Academy reached distant towns. Families moved closer. Some sent their children to board through the winter. The Kensingtons welcomed everyone. Cornelius led long prayers each night in the chapel. His sermons always circled back to one theme: obedience. Obey your elders. Obey God. Obey without question. His words echoed in every corner of the school. Matilda was quieter. She taught writing, reading, and household skills. She had a gift for connecting with students who had never held a book before. She turned chores into lessons and used farm life examples to explain big ideas. Her calm, patient style made her beloved among the children. The twins, Jeremiah and Josiah, kept order. They were odd, pale, and silent. Their method of discipline was different. There were no beatings, no whippings. Instead, they took misbehaving students for moral guidance, long talks about sin, guilt, and spiritual correction. Children always came back from those talks changed. Quieter, meeker. No one suspected anything. By the winter of 1811, over 30 children were boarding at Prairie View Academy from 3 counties. Parents were relieved. Their children were learning. The food back home stretched further without extra mouths to feed. It all seemed perfect. Too perfect. What the families didn't know was that they had handed their children over to monsters who wore the skin of saints. The Kensingtons knew exactly what the frontier needed: God, education, order. They gave it, and they used that trust to hide their darkest secrets. The first disappearance came on November 23, 1811. No one noticed at first. Samuel Hartwell, 12 years old, was the son of William Hartwell, a blacksmith from Cedar Creek. Samuel had been boarding at the academy since October. His letters home were cheerful. He wrote about books, classmates, and daily prayers. He missed his parents, but he was happy. He was supposed to return home for Thanksgiving. He never arrived. William Hartwell thought maybe the boy got delayed by snow. That winter had come early, blanketing the trails with ice and making travel difficult. Cornelius Kensington had always said he wouldn't risk sending children home in bad weather. 3 days passed. Still no Samuel. No letter. No message. Worried, William saddled his horse and set out for Prairie View. It was a rough, 20-mile journey through thick woods and deep snow. By the time William arrived, the sun was sinking behind the hills. The academy stood peacefully on the ridge, its windows glowing warm yellow from the inside. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children's voices drifted through the air, singing hymns in harmony. Everything looked normal. Cornelius met him at the gate. His face was pale, his expression heavy with grief. "Brother Hartwell," he said, reaching out his trembling hands. "I fear the Lord has called your Samuel home." William's breath caught in his chest. "He took fever 3 days ago," Cornelius explained. "Came on sudden. Matilda stayed by his side day and night. We prayed. We did everything we could." His voice cracked with emotion. "But the Lord's will cannot be undone. Samuel passed peacefully, in his sleep, asking for you and his mother." William staggered, trying to understand. Cornelius continued softly. "The illness had struck quickly. A lung fever. No warning. No time. They had planned to send word, but storms had blocked the trails. By the time it cleared, Samuel was gone." "He's buried here," Cornelius said. "Behind the chapel. We couldn't let his little body decay. We gave him a full Christian service. With hymns and prayer." William stood frozen. He hadn't seen his son. He hadn't said goodbye. And now there was a grave behind the school. Cornelius led him to it. The wooden marker was simple: Samuel Hartwell. Called home, November 21st. William knelt beside it. He wept. He didn't ask to open the grave. He didn't question the story. Why would he? Cornelius was a man of God. Matilda was a saint. The children sang hymns under candlelight. Everything looked right. But something wasn't. Because that night, as William rode home in silence, a cold doubt began to grow in his chest. His son had written only a week ago. He had been healthy, happy, excited for Thanksgiving. What kind of fever killed a boy in just 2 days? And why hadn't anyone sent word? Later, William would remember something else, something small, but chilling. When he arrived, the students had been singing a hymn. But none of the voices sounded like Samuel's. To be continued in part 3. Would you like me to continue with part 3 next? The Prairie View Incident, part 3, The Basement Secrets. "We've been praying for your family's comfort," Matilda said softly as she stepped beside her husband. Tears welled in her pale eyes. Samuel was such a bright, godly child. His final words were about how grateful he was for his education, and how much closer to Jesus he had grown through his final trial. William Hartwell wept. He had lost his only son. And for the moment, he believed them. In those days, death was a common visitor. Fevers and sudden sicknesses swept through frontier towns without warning. William had known other families who buried children too young, too soon. So he accepted the story. The Kensington's sorrow seemed real. Their decision to bury Samuel quickly sounded reasonable, especially in the cold. The cemetery behind the academy's chapel held several small graves. Cornelius explained they were from earlier epidemics, all children the academy had cared for until the very end. Samuel's grave had a wooden cross with his name, the dates, and a short message: "Beloved student. Now with Jesus." Matilda handed William a bundle: Samuel's clothes, his writing slate, and a small wooden cross Cornelius had carved. Tied with a ribbon was a lock of Samuel's hair. "We cut it just before the burial," Matilda said gently. "So you'd have something of him always." William rode home through the snow with grief in his heart, but no suspicion. Not yet. In the following months, 5 more children died at Prairie View Academy. Each death came with a new explanation: illness, brain fever, lung sickness, consumption, always sudden, always unstoppable, always wrapped in religious comfort. In December, 10-year-old Mary Patterson from Hickory Grove passed from what Cornelius called brain fever. Her parents received a letter and a prayer book, supposedly her final comfort. January brought the death of Joseph Fletcher, age 14. The story was consumption, weeks of coughing and weakness. Along with the sad news came a carved wooden angel he had made as a Christmas gift, but had been too sick to send. In February, it was 8-year-old Rebecca Martinez, said to have died from lung fever. The Kensingtons held a service without her parents. Weather had kept them away. Cornelius wrote a long, loving letter full of scripture and her final prayers. Then came March. Two brothers, David and Andrew Kelly, ages 11 and 13, died just days apart. Same mysterious fever that took Samuel Hartwell. They had asked, the Kensingtons said, to be buried side by side, so they could keep studying together in heaven. Each time, the Kensingtons were full of sympathy. They never asked for more money. They even gave small keepsakes, locks of hair, favorite books, or gifts supposedly made by the children before they died. No one questioned them, until parents started talking. During trips to town, or at church gatherings, whispers began. Quiet at first, but spreading. Every child who died had been a boarder, not a day student. No one had seen them sick, except the Kensingtons. Every death happened while most students were away helping on family farms, when there were no other children to see or ask questions. And more chilling than anything else, the children who died were special. Bright, talented, gifted. Samuel Hartwell had been ahead in reading and math. Mary Patterson was gifted in music and languages. Joseph Fletcher was an artist. Rebecca Martinez read far above her age. The Kelly boys were among the Academy's best students. The pattern was forming, but still just suspicion. Until Anne Prescott, 10 years old, smart, curious, too observant. She had been at the Academy since September, and her letters home had started to worry her mother, Martha. Anne wrote about new students who arrived but never stayed. About cries in the night. The wind, the Kensingtons said. She spoke of basement lessons, secret topics she wasn't allowed to talk about. And she described something worse, how once lively students became quiet, pale, obedient. The pale sickness, Anne called it. A look in their eyes like they were scared, even when they smiled. Martha thought maybe it was homesickness. But the letters got stranger. Anne described ceremonies in the basement chapel, and students chosen for advanced spiritual training, who were never seen again. She said the twins, Jeremiah and Josiah, watched everyone, and told their parents everything. That December, Martha couldn't wait any longer. She rode out to bring Anne home for Christmas. But when she arrived at the Academy, something felt wrong. The building was quiet, too quiet. No laughter, no lessons, just silence. Matilda met her at the door, hands folded, face full of sorrow. "I'm afraid Anne has taken ill," she said. The same fever that claimed young Samuel. It came on sudden during her evening prayers. "She's resting now, too weak for visitors." Matilda wrung her hands, then added, "You should come back in a few days. Let her rest. It's better to remember her strong." But Martha had read those letters. She had seen the signs. She didn't believe them. She pushed past Matilda and called out, "Anne!" A moment later, a voice answered from deep inside the building, small, panicked, and unmistakable. "Mama, help me, Mama." A door slammed, heavy footsteps, then silence. Matilda stammered excuses. Cornelius appeared from a side hall, hair messy, face pale. "Mrs. Prescott," he said quickly, "Anne is delirious. Her mind is confused. Fever dreams. She may say things that frighten you, but they're not real." But Martha had already heard enough. She ran toward the sound. The twins, Jeremiah and Josiah, now stood silently at the foot of the stairs, pale as always, blocking her path. Martha didn't stop. "I'm taking my daughter," she said. "Now." Cornelius tried to calm her. "Please. She's confused. She needs rest. She might not even recognize you." But Anne's voice came again, louder, more desperate. "Mama, don't let them take me to the basement again. Please don't leave me here." That word, basement, chilled Martha to her core. She threatened to ride back with the sheriff. To expose them. To bring an investigation. The Kensingtons hesitated. Then, finally, they led her upstairs. Anne was lying in a small bed. She looked thin, pale, scared, but she was not sick. Her eyes were clear, her grip strong, and she whispered, over and over, "Please take me home. Don't leave me." Matilda tried to explain. "The fever broke yesterday. She's just confused. Dr. Coleman from Kaskaskia said." But Martha had stopped listening. She helped Anne out of bed, wrapped her in a blanket, and carried her outside. As they rode away, Anne whispered something that made Martha's blood freeze. "Mama, they're not all buried in the cemetery. Some of them are still in the basement." That night, back in their own home, Anne slept by the fire, too frightened to speak. But in the coming days, her story began to unfold. A story that would finally begin to tear apart the Kensington's perfect mask, and reveal the evil hiding beneath. To be continued in Part 4. Let me know when you're ready for Part 4. The Prairie View Incident, Part 4, What Anne Remembered. Anne Prescott didn't speak for 2 days after her return. She stayed curled under a quilt, close to the fireplace, barely eating. Her eyes stayed wide, like she was still in the basement at Prairie View Academy. Her mother, Martha, didn't push her. But she watched over her daughter closely. On the third morning, Anne whispered, "I'm ready now." Martha gently helped her sit up and gave her warm tea. Anne held the cup tightly, her fingers trembling. Then she began to talk. It started with a knock on her door late one night. "It was Mrs. Kensington," Anne said. "She told me to get dressed. That I'd been chosen." "Chosen for what?" Martha asked softly. "They said I had a gift," Anne replied. "A sharp mind, and they wanted to use it for God." Martha clenched her jaw. "Go on." Anne described how Matilda led her down a narrow hallway and through a hidden door. It was behind the main chapel, a door she had never noticed before. Behind that door was a long staircase going down, Anne said. Stone steps. It smelled wet, like dirt and something old. The basement was dark, lit by oil lamps hanging from hooks in the stone walls. The air was cold, her breath came out in clouds. "They called it the chapel below," Anne said. "They told us it was the true place of learning, where real wisdom lived." "How many others were there?" Martha asked. Anne's voice trembled. 5 children that first night. All boarders. All the smart ones. They said we were special. That we could hear the voice of the divine, if we learned to listen. Martha shivered. "Did you hear anything?" Anne hesitated. "Not at first. Just chanting. Long prayers in a strange language. The Kensingtons said it was older than the Bible. That it came from before the flood." "Did they hurt you?" Anne shook her head slowly. "Not at first. But they made us fast. Go without food for days. They made us copy strange symbols from a red book. And they told us if we didn't obey, we'd go to the deep room." "What's the deep room?" Martha asked, her voice tense. Anne looked up, eyes filling with fear. "It's where they take the ones who question things. The ones who try to leave." Martha felt her stomach turn. "They took Samuel Hartwell there," Anne said. "He started asking too many questions. Said the voices in the basement weren't angels. Said they were something else." "What happened to him?" Anne looked away. "He screamed for hours. Then it got quiet. They said he died from fever. But I heard them say his heart had burst." Martha pressed a hand to her chest, trying to stay calm. "After that, the rest of us stopped asking questions," Anne continued. "We pretended to believe, pretended to see the visions they wanted." "Did you?" Martha asked. Anne hesitated. "One night, I think, I saw something. In the dark, behind the altar. Something tall, watching, breathing." She paused. "It had eyes that didn't blink. And its voice came from the walls. Not from a mouth. It knew my name." Martha whispered, "What did it want?" Anne didn't answer at first. Then she said, "It wanted us to forget who we were. It wanted us to be empty." Martha felt a chill run down her spine. "They made us repeat strange prayers," Anne went on. "Said if we opened our minds, we'd be used for holy purpose. But it didn't feel holy." "What did it feel like?" "Like something was crawling into my head," Anne whispered. "Like it wanted to live inside me." Martha pulled Anne close, wrapping her arms around her. Her daughter was trembling. "They told us if we ever told anyone, we'd bring ruin to our families. That the spirit would follow us home." Martha held her tighter. "No one is going to hurt you again." Anne looked up. "Mama, there are others still there. They don't have anyone to come get them." Martha nodded slowly. "Then we'll bring help." That same night, Martha rode to town and demanded a meeting with Sheriff Isaac Boone. At first, the sheriff was doubtful. Prairie View Academy had a good reputation. The Kensingtons were respected. He had even attended one of their church dinners. But Martha did not back down. She brought Anne with her the next morning. The sheriff listened to her entire story. And when he saw the fear in Anne's eyes, he knew something was wrong. Sheriff Boone gathered a team of 3 deputies and rode to the academy. When they arrived, the Kensingtons greeted them with calm smiles. "We're always happy to welcome law enforcement," Cornelius said. "But I must say, these accusations are quite strange." "Then you won't mind if we look around," the sheriff said. They began upstairs. Classrooms, dormitories, everything looked clean and proper. But when they reached the chapel, Anne pointed. "The door's behind that altar," she said. Cornelius stepped forward quickly. "Now hold on." But the sheriff held up a hand. "Stand back." 2 deputies moved the altar and found a wooden panel behind it. At first it looked like a wall. But when they tapped it, it gave a hollow sound. They pried it open. Behind it was a narrow stone stairway, just as Anne had described. The air pouring up was cold and thick with rot. The sheriff lit a lantern and led the way down. What they found in the basement made one deputy vomit. The walls were carved with symbols, deep, angry cuts that looked ancient. Chains hung from metal rings in the floor. There were beds made of straw, torn clothing, small shoes, and behind a second door, locked with 3 heavy bolts, they found the deep room. Inside, the air was sour and thick. And there were bones, small ones, child-sized. The sheriff stepped back in horror. "We're shutting this place down," he said. Cornelius and Matilda were arrested that night. The twins vanished before the deputies could find them. The academy was sealed off. But the story was far from over. Because in the months that followed, more children who had once studied at Prairie View began to have the same nightmares. Of dark stairways, of voices in the walls, of something watching them from the shadows. Something that never left. To be continued in Part 5. Ready when you are for Part 5. The Prairie View Incident, Part 5, Whispers in the Walls. Sheriff Boone had shut the academy down. Boards covered the windows. A rusted chain locked the iron gate. The place looked dead, but some said it was still breathing. Children who had once studied there were waking at night in cold sweats, clutching their blankets, their mouths dry from screaming. And they all described the same thing. Whispers. From the walls. From beneath the floor. From the corners of their dreams. One boy, Henry Griggs, tried to explain to his parents what he heard at night. "It's like someone's calling my name," he said, his voice shaking. "But it's not anyone I know. It's not human." Henry's father told him it was just bad memories. But that same night, Henry's dog wouldn't go near his room. It barked at the walls, growled at the floorboards, then ran outside and refused to come back. Across town, Anne Prescott heard the same whispers. She tried covering her ears. Sleeping downstairs, even sleeping at the neighbor's house. But it didn't stop. "Mama," she said one morning, "I think something followed me home." Martha didn't want to believe it. But the signs were there. The clock stopped at 3:13 every night. Scratches appeared on the inside of the window glass, long and thin, like made by nails. And one morning, Anne's red notebook, the one she had used in the basement, was lying open on the kitchen table. It had been locked away in the sheriff's office. That's when Martha went to see Reverend Elijah Crane. The Reverend was in his 60s. Gray beard, worn hands. He had served Prairie View for nearly 40 years. He had always believed the academy was doing good work. But now, he wasn't so sure. Martha told him everything. When she finished, Reverend Crane sat quietly, his fingers laced. "I remember," he said finally. "Back when the Kensingtons first arrived. They said the school was for gifted children. But some folks noticed strange things." "Like what?" Martha asked. "They held services at odd hours," he said. "Sundown prayers, moonlit gatherings, and sometimes, the children would chant in tongues no one understood." "You didn't report it?" Martha asked. "I tried," he said. "But they always had a reason. Always had someone in town to vouch for them. The school brought in money. No one wanted to look too closely." Reverend Crane rubbed his temples. "But I've read about things like this," he said. "Dark teachings that pretend to be holy. Secret societies that mix scripture with something older. Something, not of God. Martha leaned forward. Then what do we do? The Reverend sighed. We pray. And we prepare. That night, he and Martha returned to the academy. Anne insisted on coming too. She said she needed to face it. They brought lanterns, salt, holy water, and Reverend Crane's oldest Bible. The building creaked as they stepped inside. Dust swirled in the air. The silence was thick. Anne led them to the basement entrance. The stairway was darker than before. The lamps once lining the walls were missing. And the stone steps were cold, ice cold. As they descended, the whispers began. First just a soft hum. Then voices. Dozens of them, calling Anne's name. Anne, come back. Anne, stay with us. She stopped, clutching the railing. Reverend Crane stepped in front, holding the Bible high. In the name of the Lord, he said, voice shaking, we walk in light. You have no hold here. The whispers grew louder, angry, hissing. The walls seemed to pulse with sound. Anne took a deep breath. The altar is ahead. They reached the bottom of the stairs. The stone room stretched wide, its walls covered in symbols. The red book was still on the altar. Martha gasped. I thought the sheriff took it. Anne stepped forward, hand trembling, and opened the book. Inside were pages filled with strange writing. Symbols. Names that weren't names. Some of the ink looked fresh. Reverend Crane looked over her shoulder. I've seen this script once before, he said. It's called Enochian, but this version is corrupted. Twisted. Suddenly, the flames on their lanterns flickered wildly. And the stone floor began to shake. Put the book down, Reverend Crane shouted. Anne slammed it shut. Silence. Then something moved in the darkness behind the altar. A shape, tall, thin, its head almost touching the low ceiling. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with light, but with hunger. Don't look at it, the Reverend whispered. But Anne was frozen. She stared at it, unable to move. The creature took a step forward. Then another. Martha grabbed Anne and pulled her back. Reverend Crane stepped between them and the thing. In the name of Christ, I command you, leave this place. The thing hissed, its voice like wind scraping over bones. You are too late, it whispered. The seed has been planted. Reverend Crane held up the Bible. I said leave. The creature screamed. The sound was not loud, it was deep, inside their heads. It felt like their skulls would break. Anne collapsed. Martha dropped to her knees, covering her ears. The Reverend pressed forward, chanting in Latin now. The creature howled again, and began to fade. Bit by bit, like smoke pulled through a crack in the air. The whispers faded too. The symbols on the walls dimmed. The red book caught fire, burning with green flame. When the light returned to normal, the altar was gone. Only black ash remained. Anne sat up slowly, her nose bleeding. Is it gone? She asked. Reverend Crane nodded. For now. Martha held her daughter close. But she knew it wasn't over. Back in town, the sheriff was already dealing with new reports. Children waking up with bruises shaped like hands. Voices whispering through fireplaces. Drawings of symbols showing up in school notebooks. The academy was empty, but something had escaped, and it was hungry. To be continued in part 6. Let me know when you're ready for part 6. The Prairie View Incident, part 6, The Hidden Ledger. 2 weeks after the basement burned, Reverend Crane stood at his pulpit, Bible in hand, but his heart felt heavier than ever. Something was wrong in Prairie View. Even after the creature vanished, the town didn't feel clean. The air was colder, the nights were darker, and fear was spreading like wildfire. More children were reporting the same nightmares. More dogs ran from their homes. Strange markings showed up on sidewalks and doorsteps, circles, triangles, twisted letters drawn in soot or chalk. Sheriff Boone reopened the Kensington Academy for a full investigation. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought in a man from Chicago. His name was Dr. Ellis Marrow, a former professor of folklore and symbology. Quiet man, round glasses, carried a leather satchel full of old books and copper instruments. This isn't just ghost stories, he told the sheriff. This is ritual magic, very old, and very dangerous. Dr. Marrow walked through the academy slowly, noting the carvings above door frames, the symbols behind old chalkboards, the secret compartments hidden in the wooden walls. He found a loose panel in the principal's office. Behind it was a black leather ledger. Inside were names. Dozens of names. Children. Dates. And something else. Strange labels next to each name. Binder. Whisperer. Seer. Vessel. Sheriff Boone stared at the pages. What the hell does this mean? Dr. Marrow flipped to the back. It means these children weren't just students. They were chosen, categorized, prepared. For what? Marrow closed the book. For something unholy. Meanwhile, at the Prescott house, Anne was changing. She barely slept. Her eyes stayed wide, even in daylight. She mumbled to herself when she thought no one was listening. And her drawings were no longer normal. She used to sketch horses, flowers, trees. Now she drew strange gates. Creatures with too many eyes. Circles full of names no one could read. Martha was scared. She brought Anne back to Reverend Crane. She doesn't eat. She doesn't blink. Last night, I found her talking to the walls. Reverend Crane spoke gently to Anne. Asked her questions. But she just stared past him, her hands clutched around a stone she carried everywhere. A smooth black stone, cold to the touch. Where did you get that? He asked. Anne blinked slowly. I woke up with it. Crane took the stone and examined it. It was engraved with the same symbols from the academy basement. This is a focus, he said. Used in rituals to bind energy. It's not just a rock, it's a tether. To what? Martha asked. Crane didn't answer. That night, Marrow returned to the academy basement. He walked the scorched stone, searching for anything left behind. In the corner, he found a brick slightly out of place. Behind it was another book, smaller than the ledger, but older. Its cover was cracked leather, its pages yellowed and dry. He opened it and saw hand-drawn diagrams, rituals, chants, and sketches of figures with burning eyes and long limbs. One page stood out, a ritual called, The Opening. Beneath it, a date was written in red ink. August 3rd, just 6 days away. At Town Hall, Reverend Crane and Sheriff Boone met behind closed doors. Dr. Marrow laid out everything. The children were part of a long-term ritual, he explained. Each had a role, each was trained without knowing it. The teachers guided them, prepared them. The red notebook, just one tool among many. Reverend Crane clenched his jaw. Then what was the goal? To open a door, Marrow said. Not just a spiritual door. A real one. Something ancient wants to come through. Is it from hell? Boone asked. Marrow shook his head. Older than hell. From the space between things. Crane stood. Then we stop it. We destroy the site. It's not just the school, Marrow warned. The ritual has already spread. It's in the homes now. In the children's minds. We're running out of time. The next morning, Martha found Anne missing. Her bed was cold, her window wide open, and a message scratched into her wall. I have to finish it. Panic spread. 3 other children were missing too. Sheriff Boone and Reverend Crane led search parties into the woods. They found boot prints, broken branches, scraps of red cloth. They followed the trail deep into the trees, far beyond where most dared to go. At the center of an old clearing stood something new. Stone pillars, arranged in a circle, 6 feet tall, covered in the same markings from the red book. In the center, a hole dug into the earth. And in the hole, a stone table. Anne and the other children stood around it, their eyes glowing faintly in the shade. None of them spoke, but all turned when the adults stepped into the circle. Anne, Martha cried, come to me, but Anne didn't move. Reverend Crane stepped forward, clutching his Bible and a flask of holy water. We know what's happening, he said calmly. You're being used. The children's lips moved together. In perfect unison. The gate must open. The voices demand it. Sheriff Boone raised his gun, unsure if it would do any good. Dr. Marrow stepped beside him. We can break the tether, he whispered. But we have to destroy the altar, and the stone. Martha held out the black stone Anne had once carried. Use this. Crane nodded. Together, they stepped into the circle. The moment they crossed the line of stones, the ground shook. The children screamed in one voice, not in pain, but in rage. Wind swirled around them, shadows danced. Crane threw the holy water on the altar. Dr. Marrow smashed the stone against the edge of the table. Crack! A sound like thunder split the air. The altar glowed, then exploded in a flash of white light. The children collapsed. Silence. Then birds began to sing. Anne blinked. "Mom," she whispered. Martha ran to her. Reverend Crane exhaled. "It's over," Boone said. But Marrow didn't smile. "No," he said, looking at the glowing stone fragments still pulsing in the dirt. "This was just the first attempt. To be continued in Part 7. The Prairie View Incident, Part 7, The Whisper Fields." The town of Prairie View hoped the nightmare was over. Anne Prescott and the other children were home. The altar was gone. The stone was shattered. But peace didn't return. That night, the fields outside town began to whisper. Not the wind, not the trees. Real whispers. Dozens of voices speaking in broken sentences. Some too soft to understand. Others loud enough to wake sleeping families. People said the corn talked. That if you stood alone in the rows, you'd hear your name. Others said the fields moved even when the air was still, as if something crawled just beneath the soil. Sheriff Boone called an emergency town meeting. Half the town came. The rest were too scared to leave their homes. Reverend Crane stood at the front of the church, next to Dr. Marrow, trying to explain. "What we saw in the woods," Crane said, "was only part of a greater ritual. Something was broken, but something was also released." Dr. Marrow nodded. "I believe the ritual failed to complete, but still opened a crack, a doorway. Not wide, but enough for something to leak through." A farmer named Amos Jacobs stood up. "What kind of something?" Marrow answered, "Entities. Creatures. Not fully physical, not fully spirit. They live in the between, what the old books call, the thin places." "Are they dangerous?" someone shouted. Marrow didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Meanwhile, Anne stopped speaking again. She sat by her window every night, staring at the fields. She no longer drew pictures. Instead, she scratched shapes into her wooden desk, circles inside squares, crosses inside stars. Martha begged Reverend Crane to help. He brought Anne to the church. Lit candles. Said prayers. But Anne just whispered, "It's not done yet." Crane leaned in. "What's not done, Anne?" She stared at him. "The gate. 2 nights later, a boy named Thomas Fay disappeared. His father found his bed empty. No note, no sound. The only clue was a trail of mud leading from the window to the back fence, and beyond that, into the cornfields. Sheriff Boone organized a search party at dawn. 20 men, shotguns, lanterns. They entered the fields and split into rows. The corn was tall, too tall for July. Boone walked down the middle row, calling, "Thomas." Behind him, the stalks moved. He turned. Nothing. Ahead, a child's giggle. He rushed forward, lantern high, only to find an old scarecrow lying face down in the dirt. Its head was missing, carved into its chest. Vessel. Boone didn't sleep that night. At the church drive, Marrow was digging through the red ritual book they had found in the basement. He found a chapter called, "The Reaping." It described an event after the opening. A time when entities fed, not on flesh, but on identity. They consume names, Marrow told Crane. Memories. The very idea of who someone is. That's why Anne changes, Crane whispered. Why she forgets who she was. Marrow nodded. And now it's happening to others. Crane looked at the stone fragments still locked in the safe. Can we reverse it? Marrow hesitated. Maybe. But we need the original ritual site. It was destroyed. Marrow shook his head. No, that altar was only a copy. There's another. The original altar is older. Deeper. Hidden beneath the whisper fields. That night, Reverend Crane returned to the fields with Anne. She walked ahead of him, barefoot, her eyes glassy. They walked past the edge of the corn and into the tall grass. Anne stopped beside a large oak tree. She knelt and pressed her hand to the ground. It's here, she said. Crane got on his knees. The soil felt warm, unnaturally warm. He dug with his hands. After 5 minutes, his fingers hit stone. He brushed away the dirt and found what looked like a lid. A large, circular slab carved with familiar symbols. Anne whispered, "Don't open it." "Why not?" Crane asked. "Because it's already open." And then the ground shook. Dash dash dash. Back at town, people woke to a strange sound. It was not thunder, not wind. It was a deep hum, like 1,000 bees buzzing underground. Animals ran, windows shattered, and the air filled with the scent of iron and ash. Boone, still awake, grabbed his rifle and rushed outside. Above the fields, the sky shimmered. Not lightning, something else. A thin black crack ran across the sky, like a tear. From it, dark threads reached downward, into the earth. Boone whispered, "Lord help us." Dash dash dash. Crane pulled Anne away from the stone and ran back to town. Behind them, the ground cracked. From the hole came a low growl, wet and gurgling. Anne screamed once and then fainted. Crane carried her the rest of the way. When he reached the church drive, Merrow was waiting. "It's happening," Crane gasped. Merrow opened his bag. Inside was a copper staff wrapped in blue cloth. "This might be our only chance." "What is it?" "A sealing rod," Merrow said. "It binds energy. It must be driven into the original site before the final breach." Crane looked at Anne. "Can we stop it?" Merrow looked out the window, at the sky cracking open. "I don't know," he said. "But we have to try." Dash dash dash. To be continued in Part 8. The Prairie View Incident, Part 8, Beneath the Roots. The sky above Prairie View was tearing open. From the long black crack, strange whispers filled the air. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. Like cold fingers pressing against the soul. In every home, people huddled close, praying the sound would stop. But it didn't. The ground pulsed beneath their feet like a beating heart. And in the distance, the whisper fields glowed faintly red, like fireflies trapped in soil. Sheriff Boone stood outside the church, gripping his rifle tight. He watched the glowing fields, shaking his head. "This isn't a storm," he muttered. "This is a warning." Dash dash dash. Inside the church, Reverend Crane, Drive, Merrow, and Martha Prescott knelt beside the unconscious Anne. She was breathing, but barely. Her skin felt cold. "Doctor." Merrow lit a lantern and pulled out a thin journal from his bag. "There's no more time," he said. "We go now." Crane nodded. "The sealing rod, are you sure it will work?" Merrow hesitated. "If it's placed at the source and activated, it can close the breach." Martha looked at Anne. "What happens to her if the breach stays open?" "She fades," Merrow said quietly. "The gate is using her. Holding it open through her mind." Crane's jaw clenched. "Then we end it tonight." Dash dash dash. The three of them walked back into the whisper fields. Each carried a lantern. Each step took effort, as if the air itself fought against them. Crane whispered prayers. Merrow recited passages from the Red Book. Martha didn't speak. Her eyes stayed fixed on the glowing earth. When they reached the oak tree, Anne's handprint was still fresh in the dirt. Crane and Merrow dropped to their knees and dug quickly. The ground burned their fingers. Soon the stone slab was revealed again. But this time, it had opened. A perfect circle, cut in the middle, now gaped like a dark well. And from that well, a sound rose, like breathing. Dash dash dash. They tied a rope around the thickest root and lowered themselves down, one by one. The shaft was narrow and damp. The walls were carved with symbols, some ancient, others recent. When they reached the bottom, they stood in a small chamber. At the center was an altar, made of black stone. But it wasn't empty. A figure stood behind it. It looked human, but wrong. Too tall. Its arms stretched down to its knees. Its face was smooth, no eyes, no mouth. Just skin. It raised its hand. Martha screamed, but the figure didn't move closer. It just stood, watching. Listening. "Doctor." Merrow stepped forward. He held the copper sealing rod tightly. Crane whispered, "Is it one of them?" Merrow nodded. "A keeper, left behind to protect the gate." He raised the rod. The keeper howled, a sound that shook the chamber walls. It moved. Fast. Merrow thrust the rod forward. But the keeper knocked him aside like paper. Crane grabbed the rod from the floor and lunged. The moment the rod touched the altar, The room exploded with white light. The keeper screamed, a high, screeching wail, as its body split into shadow. Then everything went still. Dash dash dash. Crane lay on his back. The rod stood upright in the altar, glowing faintly. The chamber felt colder, emptier. The sound was gone. The breathing had stopped. Doctor. Marrow coughed and sat up, bruised but alive. It's in place, he said. Now the breach will close slowly. How slowly? Martha asked. Hours. Maybe a day. But we stopped the full opening. Crane nodded. Let's get out of here. Dash dash dash. When they climbed back to the surface, the sky had changed. The black crack was fading. The whispers had stopped. The glow beneath the fields was gone. And Anne Prescott stood barefoot beside the tree, awake. Her eyes were clear. She looked up at her mother and smiled weakly. It's quieter now. Martha hugged her so tightly, Anne cried. Dash dash dash. The next morning, Sheriff Boone met with them in the town hall. Reports were coming in. The soil was returning to normal. The corn no longer whispered. Missing animals were returning. But 2 children were still gone. Thomas Fay and Sarah Miller. Reverend Crane bowed his head. We may have sealed the gate, but they were already taken. Boone said nothing. He just stared out the window at the fading mist. Dr. Marrow stood. Prairie View is still in danger. The gate is sealed, but not destroyed. Can we destroy it? Boone asked. No, not without breaking the land itself. All we can do is guard it. Then we guard it, Boone said. Day and night. Dash dash dash. Crane returned to the church that evening and placed the red ritual book in a locked box under the floorboards. Some pages had burned during the light blast. But most of the book was intact. He whispered to it, you won't be used again. Then he nailed the box shut. Dash dash dash. Anne Prescott sat by her window, drawing again. This time, she sketched a flower. Then a sunrise. Then her mother's face. When Martha entered the room, Anne smiled and said, I think it's gone. Martha kissed her forehead. You're home. Dash dash dash. But outside, deep beneath the roots, in the chamber of stone. The ceiling rod still glowed. And from the cracks in the altar, tiny black threads pushed gently upward. Searching for air. Searching for a way back. Dash dash dash. To be continued in Part 9. The Prairie View Incident, Part 9, The Ones That Remain. 3 days after the sealing of the gate, peace began to return to Prairie View. The strange lights vanished from the sky. The crops, once cold and whispering, grew warm again under the sun. People walked the streets without fear, and the nightly prayers stopped sounding like desperate cries. But Reverend Crane couldn't rest. Not yet, because deep down, he felt something watching. Something unfinished. And that something was still here. Dash dash dash. In the sheriff's office, Boone sat at his desk with a bottle of rye and a pile of reports. Cattle found drained of blood. Shadows seen moving against fences with no bodies attached. A baby born with black eyes that faded only after its 3rd day. Each report ended the same, unexplained. No signs of natural cause. Boone rubbed his temples. We closed the gate, but we didn't clean the mess it left behind. His deputy, Alice, stepped in. You better come with me, Sheriff. It's happening again. Dash dash dash. Out in the north fields, not far from the old Prescott barn, the earth had opened. Not like before. No glowing mist, no hum. This was a sinkhole, 10 feet wide, maybe 15 deep. At the bottom lay the body of Thomas Fay. But he hadn't aged. He looked exactly as he did the night he vanished. Clothes clean, skin unbruised, except his mouth was stitched shut. Dash dash dash. Dr. Marrow examined the boy's body at the church, laid out under candlelight. The stitching wasn't done with thread, he said grimly. It's plant fiber, like corn silk, woven tight. Boone stared at Thomas's pale face. He's not rotted. How? Marrow glanced at Reverend Crane. Because he was kept, preserved, as an offering. Martha stood nearby, holding Anne's hand tightly. Does this mean the gate is open again? She asked. Crane shook his head. No, but something made it through before we closed it. Something small, and patient. Marrow nodded. A watcher, left behind to observe, or prepare. Anne whispered, he's not the only one. They turned to her. She pointed to the church door. Sarah's coming back too. That night, fog rolled back into Prairie View. Thick, heavy, like smoke that had waited in the soil. Sheriff Boone stood outside the church, rifle in hand. "I've had enough of this," he growled. Then he heard singing. A soft child's voice, floating through the fog. "Down in the roots we play, under the lightless day." The tune made his skin crawl. From the mist, a small figure appeared. It was Sarah Miller. Like Thomas, she looked unchanged. Same dress, same braids, but her eyes were wrong. Too wide, too dark, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, 3 more children stood in silence. None from Prairie View, and each had mouths sewn shut. Reverend Crane lit every candle in the church and began to chant a protection prayer. Anne sat on the pew, her knees pulled to her chest. Martha stood at the door with a kitchen knife. Dr. Merrow prepared a circle of salt around the altar. "They're not ghosts," Merrow said. "They're husks. The gate sent these, to test us." Crane's voice was steady. "We will not break." Suddenly, the candles blew out. The doors creaked, and the children entered. The silence inside was terrifying. The children moved slowly, like wind-up dolls. No blinking, no sound. Sarah stepped toward Anne. Her sewn lips twisted into what looked like a smile. Anne stood up. "It's okay," she whispered. "I know you're not really Sarah." The thing pretending to be Sarah twitched. Anne continued, "I saw you in my dreams. You're the route taken. You want me to open it again." Dr. Merrow yelled, "Anne, don't speak to them." But Anne stepped forward and touched Sarah's forehead. And then she closed her eyes. Inside her mind, Anne saw it all. The tunnels, the black roots, the Watcher, the real one, waiting just below the stone seal. It had many names. In one world, it was called the Sleeper Beneath. In another, Whisper Father. Here, in Prairie View, it had no name. But it was awake, and it was angry. Anne opened her eyes. She whispered, "You can't have this place." Then she fell to her knees and screamed. A sound like thunder filled the church. The fake children dropped one by one, limp like broken puppets. Their mouths opened. Dust poured out. Dr. Merrow rushed to Anne. "You touched its mind," he said. "How?" She trembled. "It showed me what it wants." Martha held her tightly. "What does it want?" Anne stared at the altar. "It wants a door, and I'm the key." Reverend Crane met with Boone and Merrow the next morning. "We must leave nothing behind," he said. "No entrance, no tool, no trace." They agreed to burn the Whisper fields, salt the roots, seal the stone with iron and prayer, and then bury it all. That night, the townspeople gathered around the field. They poured oil across the soil. Dr. Merrow drove iron spikes into the oak's trunk. Boone lit the first torch. And Reverend Crane said the final words. When the flames rose, Anne stood beside her mother, eyes shining with tears. "It's angry," she whispered. "But it's trapped again." As the fire burned, black shapes danced in the smoke. Not everyone saw them, but the ones who did never spoke of it. They just nodded quietly and never looked back at the fields again. To be concluded in Part 10. The Prairie View Incident, Part 10, What Cannot Be Buried. Months passed. The fields no longer whispered. The fog stayed away, and for a time, Prairie View was quiet. But Reverend Crane knew better. Evil doesn't die, it waits, and sometimes, it remembers. The townspeople did their part. The oak was chopped down and burned root to crown. Iron bars were laid across the hole where the stone once covered the gate. The ashes were buried under 12 feet of salted earth. Then came the planting. Corn was replaced with wheat. Wheat with hay. Nothing grew well, but that was fine. It wasn't about crops anymore. It was about keeping something in. Anne changed too. She laughed less. Sometimes she spoke of dreams where she wandered endless tunnels made of teeth and bark. But she stayed strong. Reverend Crane taught her scriptures, not just from the Bible, but from older books, forgotten ones, written in languages only the desperate remembered. He taught her how to resist voices in the night, How to guard her mind. How to draw salt lines that could not be broken. She was no longer a frightened girl. She was a watcher, too. One autumn morning, Sheriff Boone returned from a patrol to find Drive Marrow waiting on his porch. Marrow looked pale. He held a jar. Inside it, something moved. A finger, still twitching. Boone stepped back. Where did you get that? Marrow whispered, the Miller barn. Boone, Crane, Marrow, and Martha went together. The barn was cold. The ground around it had cracked open again. Thin black vines grew where no seeds were planted. They pulsed, as if alive. In the hayloft, they found the source. A sack made of stitched leaves. Inside, flesh, pieces, small, preserved. Marrow whispered, he's trying to build again. Crane closed his eyes. No, it is trying to return, through new roots. Martha looked sick. Then we didn't burn enough. No, said Crane, we buried it, but we should have burned Prairie View to the ground. That night, thunder rolled across the town. But no rain came, only wind, and whispers. Anne stood at her window and listened. She could hear it calling. You were made from me, little seedling, open the door. She picked up her chalk and drew a symbol on her window. A barrier. The whisper stopped. Then, another voice. Familiar. Help me, Annie. She turned. Her father stood in the hallway. But he had been dead for 7 years. Anne didn't blink. You're not my father. The thing smiled. Its skin cracked open. Black mist poured out. Anne ran to the church. Reverend Crane was already lighting candles. Martha held a shotgun. Boone stood at the door with his badge pinned to his chest, ready for war. Outside, townsfolk screamed, not from pain, but from memory. The route taken didn't need to kill this time. They needed only to remind Prairie View what waited beneath. Crane shouted, everyone inside. Salt the doors. But the church shook. Something massive moved beneath it. Anne screamed, it's not trying to come through the ground. It's already inside us. Dr. Marrow collapsed. His eyes turned black. His mouth stretched wide. From within him, a voice spoke. I was here when the earth was young. I was worshipped before language. And I will not be buried. Boone fired. But the bullets passed through. Anne stepped forward. She clutched her necklace, an old stone wrapped in silver. A gift from her father. A charm from before all this began. She pressed it to Marrow's chest. And spoke words in a tongue Crane had taught her. The voice screamed. Marrow dropped to the ground. Smoke poured out of him and vanished into the floorboards. Reverend Crane collapsed to his knees. We're not fighting a monster, he gasped. We're fighting a memory. Martha nodded. Then let's erase it. The townspeople gathered in silence. They voted that night, and in the morning, they left. All of them. Boone, Martha, Anne, Crane. All the families packed what they could and walked or rode until Prairie View was behind them. They salted the land once more. Left no signs, no roads, no gravestones. The church was burned, the fields plowed under. By winter, nothing remained. Years passed. No maps showed Prairie View anymore. No records, no letters. It became a ghost town, in truth and in name. Until one spring, a man with a camera came wandering. He was filming a documentary about lost towns in America. He found nothing but weeds. But when he pointed his microphone at the wind, he caught something. A soft voice. Down in the roots we play. He never released the footage. He never came back. His van was found at the edge of a cornfield that no one remembered planting. The key was still in the ignition. The engine cold. But the radio kept playing. A child's voice. Under the lightless day. Bell, if you enjoyed this terrifying journey into the unknown, don't forget to thumbs up, like the video to support the channel. Speech balloon, comment your thoughts or theories, we read them all. Loudspeaker, share this story with fellow horror fans. Check mark subscribe for more spine-chilling stories every week. Bell and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, some stories are meant to stay buried. Candle Eye.